Cloud. Okay, we are live. And Abby, so great to be here with you this morning. Um,
My gosh, Anna, it's so good to see your face.
Yay! Do you want to start off with, just kind of giving your little spiel and intro?
Sure. I'm a five element acupuncturist by training. I've been in practice since 1999, so 27 years as of literally right now, because I opened my practice in Ann Arbor, Michigan in like June, July of 99. So I've been in practice here for a long time. Over the time, I've synthesized five element, TCM, like a variety of different things. And now I am transitioning into more coaching, more teaching, specifically for lay people, not for other acupuncturists. I'm really interested in using the five element framework to illuminate blocks, lack of flow in different topics. I've covered kind of being highly sensitive in my classes. I've covered nervous system regulation. I've been very general just with self care. It kind of depends on what I'm feeling in the moment, and with these classes that I've developed. But I want to kind of get it more out there into the world because five elements are just such a brilliant way to make sense of being in a human body on a living planet. So
Mm, mm,
that's kind of a jam. So
I love it. Yeah. It didn't fully occur to me or land that you're like in the Saturn return of your practice.
oh,
Like
oh,
going through this kind of transition. Yeah.
that's oh.
Yeah, it's a great thing. It sounds like it's
I
maturing into
know
some.
my personal Saturn return when I was in my late 20s was not my favorite time of year, so I'll try
Mhm,
and, you know, like delete that out as a inevitable
mhm.
for my
Yeah,
professional Saturn return.
yeah. It sounds like it's coming together in a beautiful way. We, I think, recently were reflecting, on our long time like overlaps and, kind of intertwining, kind of personal and professional trajectories. And I think we decided that it's been like what, 20 years since we,
And at least 20 years, I just
yeah, yeah, it's been like a couple decades since we first met. And, my first office when I started my practice back in 2005 was, kind of like a little um, sublet, in a space at the Center for Sacred Living, which you had started with, colleagues.
oh my God, I forgot
And
that was the first office.
yeah, it was my first official office. Previously kind of like just been gifted generously a little room to use by Audrey Simon. Like,
Yes.
like
Yep.
rest in so much beauty. But so that was the beginning of my naturopathic practice, which lasted 15 years. And yeah, I think it has been, I closed my practice in 2020, kind of having come to a turning point and readiness for something different, which kind of opened my trajectory into, kind of transitioning from a practice that had covered um, a lot of different areas around like working with folks living with chronic illness and oncology care and a lot of integrative mental health toward more kind of an explicit focus on mental and spiritual health with getting into psychedelic assisted therapy and then subsequently training other clinicians and facilitators doing that work. And yeah, so I did that for about 5 years and stepped away a little over a year ago, kind of from working in a more, I don't know, I guess like leadership and training educational capacity in that space toward deepening into work with clients once again, but really kind of with a focus now on really just paring down spiritual care and my current work is in Buddhist chaplaincy. So I'm in the process of doing clinical pastoral education and doing spiritual care with clients, kind of within that framing, but also with a lot of different lenses that I've brought into the work that I've been doing for the last, couple decades with uh, the different training and teaching that I've had from various indigenous practitioners and elders and um, curanderas and kind of weaving some of those different things together with kind of a little bit of smattering of parts work and recovery 12 step recovery, just a lot of different things. So that's what I'm up to these
That is
days.
rich. I mean,
It's
really, like,
yeah.
it is amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fun. It's just I like keeping things moving. I like, things building on one another. And, I think just the way that we've overlapped and, my background before getting into naturopathic medicine was in cultural anthropology and studying and kind of learning about healing systems from around the world and traditional and indigenous models of health and wellness and sickness and death and dying and healing and plant medicine and ethnobotany and all of those things has been my jam for many, many years. And I think, that's one of the ways that our intersection of interests in um, an elements approach, while I don't have a maybe formal, well, I have some formal training in Chinese medicine philosophy just from my time at uh in naturopathic medical school. But yeah, I mean, I think like all of the earth-based healing traditions on the planet really have had and continue to have elemental wisdom and earth-based kind of wisdom interwoven. So I think that's, yeah, a very like archetypally rich, place to be and
Oh,
to connect with you.
so much. Yeah, so much. And found I found Chinese medicine in college. I actually was a Chinese studies major and was basically a Chinese philosophy major, but I had to, take the history classes and the language and all that. But really, all I wanted to do was study the philosophy. And then when I found Chinese medicine and I realized I could actually be a Chinese philosopher for a living, which was just wild. So I wrote my thesis in Chinese medicine and studied, like, was reading about most of the, I mean, this was 1991, so there wasn't a lot of literature out there. I was often reading the classical Chinese translated to the German, translated to the English. So let's just say it was a little clunky in translation. But the main book that was out there was The Web That Has No Weaver by Ted Kapchuk, which is a beautiful book on Chinese medicine, more on the TCM side. And then I discovered Five Element in my readings for that, and then ended up deciding to go to a Five Element school because of the philosophy of it. I'm not always, the clinical practice of Five Element is not always where I land, but the philosophy has basically been the underpinning of my life since I was 21, 22, and I'm 56. So I've kind of just been sitting in this and, for a hot minute thought about going into Western medicine and was like, I cannot be in a mindset that is so divorced from the body, really. It is so Descartes, so mind over matter. And while I love Western medicine and find it fascinating and find the science of it amazing, I often find the practice of it to be more dehumanizing. And what I do love about Chinese medicine is, I mean, you can be dehumanizing in your practice of it, but you have to really work at it. It's not inherent in the system. And it's much more, as you were saying, it's much more nature based. It has rich archetypal energy to it. It is based in flow as a fundamental human right. And I think that when you come from that as a perspective of what it means to be human and what it means to flourish, and that flourishing, flowing through your life is your birthright, and you look to nature for the best examples of how to flow, and you kind of align with that, life just like the unnecessary suffering of it can dissipate. There will always be necessary suffering, and let's just dissipate the unnecessary suffering so we have as much joy and pleasure and freedom of movement as we can. So
Mm,
when you come from that as a kind of basis of the medicine, it just plays out differently down the road as a
mm,
practitioner, in the way you talk with your clients, in the way you are present to them. And so that has been like the love of my life, has been,
mm,
being
mm,
able to be deeply immersed in this, how I parent, how I view relationships, how I try and be in the world myself, how I talk to my clients. So it's not just in the treatment room. For me, this is a
mhm,
whole body experience. So
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, what you said about flow as, a fundamental human right. And oh, yeah, I mean, there's so many things in what you just said. And, we kind of touched in just briefly before going live about like the moment that we're in and the, this sort of like uh the polycrises of um ways in which, flow as a fundamental, I would say, beyond human right, but like, existential, right
yeah,
of, all beings, all sentient, beings. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and like, this, yeah, the life denying forces and pressures that have been at play and are, kind of ramping up with this yeah, just like throttling of the flow. And yeah, and how how and um where we always have agency, kind of like within, even with it, within any set of circumstances, even, kind of amidst the um just immense suffering, like unnecessary suffering that exists. And, to on so many different levels, like where we do have power and agency individually, kind of within our own consciousnesses, as well as collectively, and the way that um, reconnection with and relationship with these life giving ways of being in flow, being in relationship with nature, being in relationship with the elements, and the many myriad ways that they manifest in our lives is, not only a site of uh, resourcing, resilience, but and also a site of resistance and always have been, which is, of course, why, going back to, I mean, whatever, like throughout human history, there's for, thousands of years examples of this, but in like more recent history, like the last like 500 years, like first across Europe, kind of with the Crusades and then, with colonization, like on this continent and all of the ways that those ways have been kind of intentionally disrupted and severed as a means of kind of like taking people's source of collective and personal power or at least kind of creating the you know barriers to kind of access to that kind of to siphon off from and extract from people. But and like how are we collectively waking up to remembering, reconnecting with, and coming back to these ways. Yeah.
The two things that immediately came to mind were the ramifications of what happens when we stop flow on the planet. And you can just think about damming up water,
Hmm.
or cutting down trees that are naturally growing, the way in which those roots keep there from being landslides, where damming up water and shifting the flow can create flooding. Like the movement will always occur, and there's balance in these elements to prevent the movement that ends up. I'm trying to articulate this well. When you back up flow, the movement that then will eventually occur can be catastrophic. And
Yeah.
that happens on the planet with the elements, and that happens in our lives.
Hmm.
So one of the things I talk about with clients is, okay, you have obstacles in your life. We've stuck a dam in a stream. There are ways in which water just will find its way through. The water element itself is all
Hmm.
about just kind of this very often unspoken willpower. It just will get through. It doesn't make a big deal out of it. It will just find its way. Unless, of course, you dam it up too much and then it's torrential. And that also shows up in folks with a lot of water element in them. You hold them back for too long, and it just, the power of the force that has accumulated is quite intense because there is a lot of inherent power in that water element. The wood element also, the plants, the trees, they're all about growth and having, moving forward. It's that springtime energy. It's that, like, we've got a vision and we're making it happen. And one of the examples I've used to clients is that piece of grass that always gets up through the cement. There's always a way. And when a lot of obstacles are put in our path, what can happen with that element is a lot of hopelessness and resignation, and just
Hmm.
falling down in the face of these massive obstacles, which the culture that we are in um, puts up a ton of obstacles towards humans just flowing through their lives with ease, with joy, with presence. There's a ton of them that are put up. And so it really taxes both of these elements, especially because flow and natural ways of being are consciously made more difficult, because then the energy of fear, the energy of despair can be
Hmm.
harvested, can be used, can be extracted from. I mean, there's so many ways that benefits other people and does not benefit you. And this is also a question I bring in a lot to the treatment room. Like, when clients are talking about, they're having trouble resting. And I'm like, well, who does that benefit? Who does that conversation about, I feel guilty when I rest? Who does that conversation benefit? It doesn't benefit you. And that subconscious belief pattern that resting is lazy. Again, where did that come from? Who does it benefit? It rarely came from you, and it rarely benefits you, but it is a subconscious programming that works against you and against your natural flow, and prevents ease, pleasure, being, and kind of the natural yin yang cycle of doing and being, and active and rest, and expansion and contraction. So this, an extractive culture like ours puts so many roadblocks in the way of that natural flow, and then freaking
Hmm.
monetizes it. It just, and so for me, what's really interesting is that the elements not only provide a way of you being more in relationship with nature, but it also provides a window back into a way of being before all of this systemic bullshit got kind of implanted within us and overlaid on top of us. It's this tiny little window. And that
Hmm.
tiny little window can be as simple as go stand by a tree and really sit with it and feel its essence and how it moves and its energy. You don't have to go on a 2 week silent meditation in in the mountains to really start to experience this. All you need is some grass. All you need is a plant in your house. All you need is a tree. all you need is some running water. And if you're not near a stream, a bowl of water will do. Like you can really start to communicate. Like if you don't have the ability to do a little, fire in your backyard, or even in a fireplace in your home, you burn a candle. Like, what are the ways in which you can engage with these elements and really learn from them and get that window into the before this was
Mhm.
all managed and subjugated to it to a degree. It can't be subjugated ultimately, but they're sure
Yeah,
trying their best. So
yeah, yeah.
that was just my riff on what you said. That's where my brain went.
Yeah, no, this is great. I heard in what you were saying, like layers of things, but kind of this piece about, particularly the subconscious programming about rest and productivity, or constant movement, and the very diurnal or yang nature of this culture that kind of has set it up so that um rest feels indulgent or like laziness or what have you. And I'm just, like the first thing that came to mind when you were saying that was, just my own relationship to that, and, the communities that I work with, and just how many ancestral narratives there are around that piece, and how much there are also legacy burdens that we are carrying in our bodies that come from some of those ancestral experiences that have not, where, for Black and Brown folks, like where, particularly enslaved folks, that rest was not an option, right? And the way in which um, the way in which interruption of, and or Trisha Hersey's work comes to mind, where like rest is resistance. And it's
Yeah.
interesting because she also talks about, like, and I've seen kind of like other uh, content creators that kind of speak to this. They're like, well, my existence is resistance is not really actually applicable to everyone. Like we're not having the same experience, we don't have the same ancestral experience necessarily, and so there's different work that we have to do. But I mean, there are some things that are the same, and kind of like transmuting these cultural messages and locating the sites of resistance in our bodies to these things, thinking of the body as an altar that is also an ancestral veneration practice. This is something that has come up in my work with clients around kind of giving to ourselves this body, this embodiment of this incarnation, but also to our lineages what wasn't possible, right? And connecting with the elements, to these, like, maybe they can be suppressed, but they can never be such. I mean, it's like they're forces of nature. Like these are
Yeah.
like laws of physics. Like this is, you can it's and you were also kind of speaking to the way that suppression of water or wood, it's like you can try to inhibit that growth, but the truth will out, right? And when I think of that in terms of the body and physiological processes, and going back to what you said about Western medicine, of course we need it, and like some of the best parts of it, I'd like to keep the medical industrial con- complex. We can compost, but but like the suppression of a symptomology, or kind of like manifestation of an imbalance, like from a naturopathic perspective, like drives it deeper. So
Yeah.
now the expression is going to be more dramatic and
Yes.
more severe, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. I love Trisha Hersey's work, and I love her point of who gets to rest, And it's been interesting because in that she was saying, the politicization of, like, specifically Black people resting, and how many, of course, white people call the cops on Black people resting in public spaces or anything like that, you know. It's and and over the years I've been finding it interesting as talking to a number of my white clients, and I'm trying to articulate the difference in the, and so I'm just going to take a moment here in this rest conversation. For white folks, I don't see rest as resistance in our world, unless, and I don't think I'd ever give it the term resistance, but unless we start recognizing, like, why are we, like, we feel a lot of guilt in resistance. We aren't punished, sorry, we feel a lot of guilt in rest. We're not necessarily punished, we won't be politicized, but or policed, sorry, that's the word I'm looking for. But there is so much of this inherent guilt and shame around rest because we're not being productive enough. And so deconstructing the way in which we uphold the system, as producers, you know, as always kind of running the program of the system, and that throwing, you know, getting sand in those gears and kind of screwing with that is helpful, because as white folks, then we can start to recognize the degree to which we are tools of the state. We're just enacting, you know, through our day-to-day existence, we're just enacting the state, you know, the state beliefs, whether or not we consciously want to. And this is the part that I kind of really want to get to white folks, especially white folks who have started deconstructing, but are mostly doing it in their conscious mind. We are tools of the state without our consent. And so we have to start deconstructing and recognize on a conscious level, first off, what we have to unlearn. But then on the subconscious level, how have we been programmed so that an event happens, we are called out for our racism, and we go into fragility, and we go into whatever our patterning goes into, and it just kicks into gear without our conscious mind even being aware of it, and hijacks our system. That's the point that we get to look at. Like, what is the programming that is hijacking us and letting us just perpetuate the system unconsciously? And I think when it comes to the conversation of rest, the white people conversation is, where am I supporting the system by not allowing myself to rest? You know, which I think is a very different conversation than what folks of color have to have around rest, because of the history of, you're literally not allowed to, you know, your
Yeah,
rest is policed, you know.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's interesting nuanced differences around the same topic, but with different perspectives. And our rest as white people and our the rest as folks of color is is policed differently, you
Mm,
know.
mhm, mhm,
And
mhm.
so we white folks running around saying our rest is resistance. No, the fuck it's not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And yeah, and it just occurs to me too as you're saying all of that, like, that piece about like getting called out and then getting the system getting hijacked. And it just strikes me that like and like the body, like white bodies as kind of these like unwilling or maybe not always consenting tools of the state, like that's also ancestral. Like, I mean, in a way, like it's also like transmuting a lot of unmetabolized ancestral epigenetic memory and unresolved trauma, there as well. And kind of like it's different work, but it's the same, arena. And I mean, when I've talked with white folks that I work with, many times folks are not, and particularly like being drawn to indigenous cultures or plant medicine, and like, kind of like life ways that are connected to these, kind of earth-based elements and rhythms and cycles. But then like, I mean, like trying to sometimes having the awareness to not try and be, to try not to be appropriative. But
Yeah.
like, but having, difficulty maybe like knowing where that line is, and like also just like, yeah, having like a deep yearning, right? And a deep hunger, and like not recognizing that there's also like hundreds of years of culture loss and, kind of ancestral disconnection from like one's own deep ancestry that had that, that
Yeah,
still has that, still way back, right, in ancestral memory, like has those life ways, those cultural practices, those technologies, those, histories and legacies. Sometimes they're still being practiced, like there are, like cultures across Europe that still, retain those, even if like, kind of like European descended folks, maybe they don't really even know where their ancestors are from, and what the land was that their people were in relationship to that helped to shape those particular, kind of place-based practices.
yeah,
But, it's possible to do that reconnecting in all kinds of ways. And yeah, it just strikes me that that's a piece. And I think, like you're saying, connecting to the elements in simple ways that you can do right here, because of course, like the commodification and, kind of like wellness industrial complex, and even like, all kinds of like retreat in industrial complex, kinds of things will be like, take this, kind of like healing retreat off to, like the Amazon or whatever, but it's like you don't have to do that actually to be in relationship with the elements and begin to kind of reclaim and reconnect with them, like you're saying.
yeah. I mean, the point is that while retreats can be lovely as a way to really get out of our daily life or stuff, we have to choose them wisely. But second, it's really much more about the day-to-day practice. The little simple ways in which we bring this into our awareness and into our common practice. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, like reconnecting as simply as you can, I know, is really what it comes down to. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think like, it's so interesting to me how like sometimes there's disappointment with that, because it seems like what we're kind of sold is something that's like big and dramatic and like this like life-changing peak experience, but it's like, oh, really? Like what? Like small daily practice is actually the, the thing, but it's like, I don't know. I feel like sometimes there's like a little deflation with that. And it's interesting too, because like, I mean, I have to like smatter in a little bit of like astrology and planetary
Please do.
reference, because
Please
who would I be?
do.
But but it's like the Saturnian teacher of like, discipline and consistency that
Yeah.
produces like great rewards, but only through dedicated practice over time. It's not like the dramatic, kind of breakthrough. I mean, those are amazing. I love a breakthrough experience. I just had Uranus in my first house for the last like 7+ years. It was a lot of breakdown slash breakthrough. And with Uranus and Gemini right now, which just archetypally, speaking, is like, I don't know, it'd be interesting to get your take on this kind of elementally, but like, Uranus is an outer planet that is a kind of like disruptive, sudden, abrupt, radical, like revolutionary, like sudden change, bolt of lightning, kind of archetype. And it's in the sign of Gemini, which is an air sign that has like a lot going on, like a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas, a lot of information, like multitudes of things, like multitudes of mostly like ideas, but also technology and uh
Mm.
yeah, like systems. And so it's moving from Taurus, which is an earth sign, like Venusian earth sign, that's like very much actually based on like food systems, and it's yeah, agriculture and the land, and kind of like changes in upheaval, there, which we've also seen. But and into, the sign that, yeah, I mean, and Pluto, I'll just like one last reference, and then we can depart. I know not everyone's
I'm
going to
so
be into
fascinated by
astrology.
Pluto. So really, you can just keep talking,
Okay.
man. It's so
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, and Pluto like has this like depth, chthonic,
Yeah,
transformative, like life or death, kind of intensity, planet, in the sign of, Aquarius, also an air sign, and kind of like the two are like moving toward a trine formation, which is a cooperative, kind of relationship, in terms of like the mathematical, kind of like symmetry, but Pluto, in Aquarius, there's a lot of associations that have been made to, discovery of extraterrestrial life with AI, kind of. So like these two things, and I mean AI, that's a whole, I mean that's a whole, there's a whole lot,
question.
but yeah, but these sort of like intense shifts around like air, like,
Yeah,
with on the collective level, these are transpersonal,
yeah,
global impacts. Like it's not like small, slow moving, like, things that are day to day. These are like many, many years long, and both have historical association with a lot of the un um, a lot of the kinds of energies that are what we're speaking about as these suppressive, authoritarian, restrictive, kind of control, and like violent, kind of histories, at least in this country, in America. So yeah,
I,
elementally
I
working.
honestly, I'm not always sure elementally how to relate to this one because I mean, I listen to a lot of astrologers. Astrology fascinates me. It's a little hard for my brain to take in. And I'm like, it's so interesting because there is no air element in Chinese medicine. The
Mm-hmm,
one that,
mm-hmm,
so you've got wood, which is liver, gallbladder, it's the springtime. You've got fire, which is heart and its related organ systems, and that's the summer. You've got earth, stomach, spleen, that's the late summer. So, like in the northern hemisphere, it's like August, September. It has its own kind of vibe to it. You've got fall, metal, lung, large intestine, and you've got water, winter, kidney, bladder, the deep kind of unknown. The one that comes kind of the closest is the metal, the lung, which is very much about kind of the first breath of heaven. It has a lot more connection to air, to spirit, to the ether, but it's not like, but it feels very different than the air element in the way it's discussed in the Western traditions.
mm-hmm.
So I don't always know how to like, and I haven't gotten really into Chinese astrology, which is has its own deep complexity. You know, you've got
Mm-hmm.
elements, you've got animals, but you've got like all these different layers to it. And but I will say, going, we had spoken in the very beginning that we're in that fire horse year. I mean, fire is it's very, I mean, it's fast, but it's the like greatest expression. I'm just going to riff here for a second and we'll see if this may draw, if you can draw any conclusions. You know, the fire is like, again, in the Northern Hemisphere, like June, July, like late May, June, July, but the solstice. It is the biggest expression of the yang energy. So when you have the yin yang cycle, the yang energy, the white part of that circle is, goes up to the top, and June 21st is at the top, and the yin black part comes down, December 21st is at the bottom. So the greatest contraction, the greatest dark, opposed to the greatest expansion and the greatest light. So the fire element is taking place in that June 21st period of time. It's the most, when we talk about the five elements, we're talking about the growth cycles in nature, really. So it's very earth based. And maybe that's why it's a little hard to coordinate it with the outer planets and the constellations because it's so earth based. So we're talking about the full flowering of your garden. in the middle of June, July. All the flowers are popping, the like food is growing, but it's just like the whole like greatest expression, and the heart as a constitutional type is all about like I just want to love and be loved. I just want to be free to be you and me. It's just like open-hearted and expansive and expressive. And that's it's been interesting listening to people talk about the fire horse year because it's not always in the same way I know the fire element to be in Chinese medicine. So I get a little confused by how to kind of organize all this information and where are the correlations. Um, so I don't know if anything I said kind of sparks your brain at all, but I don't know how to elementally correlate because what we're going through as a collective, I mean, I'm so sick of this word, but it's so unprecedented. Now, Chinese medicine has been around for long enough, and Chinese astrology has, that this is not unprecedented for Chinese medicine. I mean, China is a very long lasting, dynasties upon dynasties with rise and falls, and this medicine has lived through, periods of time where there were dynasties every 50 years and there was absolute chaos, so, it probably would have a lot to say about this period of time, that we're in collectively, so I'm not 100% sure myself, though.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting because the way that I understand it from a few different systems, I don't know much about the Chinese astrological system other than, kind of like just the very tip of the iceberg, and kind of the descriptions that I've read like you about, kind of what it means to, the qualities of fire and the qualities of the animal, like the horse this year and the goat or
Hmm.
ram for 2027, which will also be a fire year. And I mean, I think about like and all and the like the Western astrological system, which is based on a four element system, but the roots of traditional astrology, Hellenistic astrology, at least, kind of from like the really what's commonly known most widely is, the ancient Greeks, but before that, have roots in the Swana region, and Egyptian astrology. So that's kind of really the origin of it. And I think about, and I'm also, a little bit familiar with some Mesoamerican astrological systems, and a little teeny bit about the Vedic, systems, but systems that look at long cycles of time, much longer even than the couple, thousands of years that maybe we know about with, some of the um, uh, kind of histories of the medicines that and the systems that we're speaking about, but tens of thousands, like long, because of the just bizarrely sophisticated mathematical understanding that these ancient cultures and ancient civilizations had to understand planetary movements and cycles, which I mean, I hear you when you say like, like your understanding of, kind of like the Chinese elements being like very earthy, and earth based, but like, from my understanding of these systems is like they are very earth based. I mean, it's a because it's like based like kind of like the hermetic principle of as above so below. I mean, it's sort of like looking at these cycles of time as like a clock. It's like, when the clock says that it's 11 o'clock, it's not 11 o'clock because the clock says it's 11 o'clock. The clock isn't making it be 11 o'clock. It's just the quality of the sun when it's like just before, noon at the like maybe peak, apex of the day. What is that like? The quality of the light, at this particular point in the season when, we're just a couple of weeks ahead of the, summer solstice. It's like that's a very unique kind of specific quality. And that's kind of like what, kind of what astrology is kind of just a map or a language for. And it's like the map is not the territory, it's just kind of another symbolic language for sort of describing the qualities and the energetics, kind of elementally of time based on polarities of light and dark, of all of these, I mean, there's day, night, there's um, other, kind of, I don't want to get too like in the weeds with it, but basically, kind of similarly to, you mentioned yin yang, kind of, and like that being kind of like maybe encompassing all kinds of um relationships that are not, I don't think of them as like binary because like each one contains the other inside it, right? But they're in this constant like, dance
Constant
between
flow.
them, right? Constant flow. And so like what I've understood about like, all of these different systems is that they're just different ways of explaining the same thing, and like long cycles of time is like, well, here we are again at a time of like great change and collapse of civilization. It won't be exactly like it's been before because like,
Right.
we're not like in a straight line. It's like kind of a spiral. And like
Yeah.
the set and setting is a little different now than it was, the last time, but it's also like certain themes archetypally are still present.
I just had a real elemental realization that I think because I was getting a little stuck in Uranus and Gemini, not sure how to correlate. I think the correlation that I've been thinking about a lot, and I've said to clients a lot of times, is that, and speaking as an American and what's going on in America right now in the United States, our country is elementally wood. We are maybe the maturity level of a 12-year-old boy. When I think about cultures like Japan, I think of Japan as a very metal culture. It's much older, but it's also based in so much reverence. It has so much, it has a lot of metallic qualities to it. If you look at Zen gardens, it's very pared away, just what's essential. It has a lot of that kind of quality to it. In contrast, our culture is young. Wood is the beginning of the growth cycle in nature. It's very adrenaline fueled. It's like we're off to the races. We're going and we're going and we're going. And that's all we're doing. We're just going and going and going and going and going. And we're all expansion, we're all movement. And we haven't yet realized as a culture that in the elemental five elemental world view, there's the growth cycle, but there's the control cycle, which means
Mm-hmm.
that when you go across the star, like that wheel, each element controls the other. So metal controls wood, it pairs away because constant growth, as opposed to what our economics folks believe, constant growth is not actually a good thing. So if we think about, we own a home and we never cut the grass, we never trim the trees, we never weed, we never do anything, it gets to be problematic. There are problems for the house, and for the people living in it. Same is true in this culture. We have just gone all in with untrammeled growth, untrammeled expansion, with no guardrails, with no controls. We've taken all the controls off since the 80s and we're just barreling on down. And I am wondering if actually, since we are at the 240-year mark where empires tend to fall, if what's happening is we're transitioning into the next element, which is the fire, which is much more community based, which is
Mm-hmm.
much more heart centered, which is, while it is the peak of yang, I don't necessarily like it's not as fast moving because it's not as directionally focused as the wood,
Mhm.
which is all about growth and expansion and vision and moving forward and achieving goals, you know. But the fire is really about sitting and enjoying all that you've created. It's really about like literally sitting around a fire and hanging with your friends
Mhm.
and like
Mhm.
being like, damn, this shit's good, like look at what we did, you know. So there's a lot of that, like heart-centered, community
Mhm.
based.
Mhm.
And it will be interesting if that is the elemental transition we are going through.
Mhm.
What has to happen is that we have to develop guardrails and controls on the wood, you know,
Mhm.
and it
Mhm.
has to transform into the fire. So that may be from a five element point of view where we kind of are as a culture. I can only speak to the United States in our transformation. But yeah, we're a very young, immature culture, and our policies and our values and our entertainment all reflect that immaturity, you know. And
Mhm.
so we're having to mature, and the maturing process isn't always pleasant,
Yeah.
as we
Yeah. I
all have
have
experienced, you know, in teenagehood,
absolutely. Yeah.
early
Yeah.
adulthood.
I have some teachers that say, like we're going through puberty, like it's gonna be ugly, it's gonna probably
Yep.
be a little uncomfy and painful, but that is the maturation process. And as long as like may we make it through as gracefully, and intact and well, as possible. Um, and given that, and kind of being at this sort of precipice moment, right? I mean, I think in terms of like what everything that we're seeing, and the ways in which, um I mean, no one knows what's going to happen, but I think that there are some probably good indicators of what might
Yeah, what are
unfold.
you seeing with the astrology of the next
Well,
year?
I mean, Um, I, 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 um, I mean, I don't know that like I can, get into anything, that's predictive that's coming from myself, because, that's not really what I do, but I follow a lot of astrologers that, some of whom I've studied with, who are very, extraordinarily adept and seasoned, who have and are scholars, who of history as well as astrology, and who draw parallels to the current configurations and the upcoming, kind of planetary configurations, and what has occurred, historically in the United States, and kind of elsewhere. Just, I mean, even like, it's fascinating because like each country has an inception chart of, like when it was founded, or like when it went through significant transformations or collective experiences. And you mentioned Japan, for example. I mean, like, some astrologers have looked at the astrology of Iran, and of Cuba, and like other kind of like pertinent countries that our country is kind of in um, relationship to. And kind of like any kind of synastry is what it's called, when you like, if we were like to look at you and I, and we were to say, here's my natal chart, here's your natal chart, when we put them together, like what some of the things like flow really well, some of the things might be kind of like a little bit, like points of tension where we learn from one another, but it's not always just like copacetic. But like, like sometimes like we have like pretty good flow overall, whereas like someone else might come in and it's not so much, well, same thing, kind of like in terms of countries. And so, some of the significators that are happening, including Uranus and Gemini, have historically coincided in the United States with times of war, either civil war or, kind of on the national uh, um, level. including, the founding of this country, and the Civil War and other important moments. So, I mean, like, nobody can know what's going to happen, but that is just, kind of like looking at the historical cyclicity of certain things that, and all that to say, I mean, look outside, like, read the news. I mean, it's like there's nothing in that. I don't think that's particularly shocking, but what we do know is that this is a period of time that is a multi-year period of time. This is not like a let's just get through 2026, like let's just get to the midterms, like let's just no, this is like a multi-year, process that we're in. And as such, like, I think, going back to what we were saying at the beginning about sites of resourcing and resilience, personally and collectively, as well as, sites of resistance. Like, how can we be thinking about ways not to like have these conversations with like fear mongering, or like doom scrolling, but just to be like, okay. And I love like what you're saying about like the transition from wood to fire, because I think people are feeling this call, to touch grass, like to get together with their, communities in person, to be,
Yeah,
connected.
real life happening. We went through this real, with COVID especially, this real virtual situation. I think the pendulum is swinging back, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's the fire. Yeah, I think I mean, we were talking before we got on live that one of the most important things for us all to do, regardless of our positionality in the culture, is, and this is thrown around so constantly right now, but is nervous system regulation. My jam these days is, what does that mean from a five element point of view? Because five element, by its nature as a medicine, is very much not a one size fits all situation. My job as an acupuncturist, when you come in, is to figure out very specifically for you in this moment in time, how is your chi flowing? Where does it need balance? What's the elemental imbalance going on? How can I help make there be better flow? And what advice can I give you to promote that in your life? The same is true with nervous system regulation. Not everybody is going to have their nervous system dysregulate in the same way, because it's going to be so individual based on your constitution and your lived experiences. So, but starting to understand how your nervous system reacts is, and because that, when your nervous system is in a space of reactivity, you are very easily manipulated. That's when you're at your most vulnerable. So you can, I mean, I think that's why in COVID, so many people moved in a fairly cult like direction, with a lot of belief systems, because it was a time of great instability and fear and survival, because there was this virus going around that could kill you. And so we've got survival level of fear activated. When that is activated, we're no longer thinking with our prefrontal cortex, and we are very easily manipulated into belief systems, into actions, into reactivity. So, first and foremost, for your spirit, for the health and well being of your soul, so you are not extracted from, so you are not manipulated, so we're not used, to the benefit of somebody else's agenda, is to learn how to regulate and really get clear as to how your nervous system works, where your vulnerabilities are, so that you can stay grounded in your authenticity and really kind of move through this period of chaos, really being clear on, like, what is the world I want to live in? What is the culture I want to create? What are the opportunities now? Because one of the astrologers that I listened to said, we're clearly in the chaos time. We all know that. We get it. If we focus solely and completely on the misery of being in the chaos time, the folks who are taking advantage of the chaos will be building the new systems that we live in. And most of those folks do not have our best interest at heart. So it's actually in our best interest to start regulating and getting very clear, what do we want to see? Well, I very clearly want to see matriarchal type community systems being built. And so, what that means is I am trying to regulate by hyper focusing on local mutual aid. What can I actually do for my community, and stay a little bit less in the larger world conversation. I will interact with it, but only in very regulated ways, meaning I will listen to the radio or I will read media that has editorial control. And so it's not just clickbait, or long form essays by people who I find are regulated, and so I'm trying not to interact with clickbait media. And so trying to really be and like learn from what is the trajectory of what's happening, listening to a lot of people like you are with this, with scholarly astrologers who are seeing the trajectory. It's so easy to get the fear and the survival level triggered. So then it's also like that sensory data of I'm sitting in my chair, I'm breathing the air is feeling warm, the sunlight is beautiful, the flight, those types of really being present to the earth and the natural surroundings. But I can get more into the different elements and how they need regulation, but that's really, I think, so essential right now as we go through this chaos time, is to explore what nervous system regulation looks like for you, so that you are not manipulated, so that you're not just wasting your life force in stress and panic, because also you're not, I don't mean productive in the capitalist sense. I mean productive in the like creative world building sense, and in the like helping your neighbors sense. If we're just panicking, we're not helping our neighbors, and then what value is your chi adding to your own well-being and to the world? So how do we regulate so that your vital chi stays yours, and it is a resource you can draw from to create what you want to create in the world, and make sure that the vulnerable people around you are taken care of, and the
Mhm.
more of the vital chi that is yours, that you keep to yourself, that you're able to not expend in unconscious ways, the more you have to be creative, and excited by and enlivened by the world in your 5 square mile radius life, that really is the world that you are living in on a day-to-day basis. So that's kind of my feeling these days about the importance of nervous system regulation, and the importance of getting very clear as to how your nervous system runs. What is your
Mhm.
unique makeup? How are you triggered?
Mhm.
How are you how are you vulnerable? So,
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that when I work with folks, um there's I mean, I'm just like, kind of in my mind, like toggling between, like individual nervous system and like collective nervous system, more so on the small scale, like, people that we're in direct relationship with, rather than like the entirety of, like all existence level collective, because that's also happening, but it's like that's bigger, than we can really hold in our experience, and can be contribute to the dysregulation. I think this is sort of what you're speaking to about like kind of titrating with intake of media and just being kind of like boundaried with that, but then also like yeah, practices are um that are resourcing, kind of at the individual level and at the community level. Like I think of Resma Menachem's work, where he's kind of like lays out practices that people can do by themselves, and then practices that are like it's really best if you get together with people and do these things, and it's like obviously there's very specific focus to that work, my grandmother's hands rather,
I love that
but
book.
yeah, but I'm thinking about it just even in terms of like yeah, just like sharing meals together, like,
Yeah.
being,
Yeah.
yeah, being outside in nature together, having a bonfire together, having, kind of like I mean, we're fortunate to live near the mighty Huron River in this beautiful, watershed here. I like to meet up. This is actually a summer solstice practice that I do, with folks like at the river, and just, connect with the elements, connect with our sources of more than human support, connect with our sources of human support and community. And then on a personal level, I mean, again, this is just like my thing. I mean, but when I do spiritual care with folks, a lot of the people who I'm working with, which many of whom are BIPOC folks, but not exclusively, but are seeking to kind of cultivate a daily spiritual practice. And I mean, I like to bring somatics, I like to bring the elements, I like to bring nature into that. But even if it's just seated meditation, that's like doesn't have those pieces, or it's altar work, sitting at an altar with a candle, with a bowl of water, connecting with one's ancestors, whatever it is, I think that if I find, for myself, these to be absolutely essential. I don't think that I would have the level of capacity and resourcing that I do if that weren't my daily practice. And
Yep.
I mean, some days like the waves wash over me, and some days I'm like barely keeping my head above water. I mean, it's not like I'm human and not like, immune. But I think my own meditation practice of bringing in a relationship with space
Mm-hmm.
is really important. Connecting to, and I guess like what I mean by that is the more restricted, closed in, ego identified, focused on the tightness of what's happening
Yeah.
that I am, while it at no time do those things go away. Like, this is not a bypassing technique, but like the more constrained that is, the fewer options I have, and the less access to, like you said, my prefrontal cortex, my, creative capacity, my ability to envision a, Black and Indigenous led matriarchal, future. All of these things, because it does, it's a fear response, which is understandable in the face of what we are encountering. It's
Yeah.
not an inappropriate response. Like, it's a very appropriate response. Our nervous systems are not going to be regulated all the time, but it's being able to come back to a regulated center and have something internal that is a ground of being, a ground of practice that
Mm-hmm.
has some, persistence through whatever is happening. And for me, that's, like accessing space, kind of like the ability to invite in a broader, kind of spaciousness to that constriction. Lama Rod Owens, who's the tantric Buddhist practitioner that I study with and sit with in his sangha, talks about that constriction as a carceral state. And he kind of is a politicized Buddhist that speaks about these hijacking fear responses as being part of the carcerality of phenomenal existence, and, kind of like a microcosm of the larger like carceralities that we're operating inside of. And if we want to be able to move toward relative liberation as well as ultimate liberation, like, we need to these, this is his teaching, but like a practice of of expanding the container, like remembering, oh, and I just looked at this, I have a little sticky post on my wall. Your unconscious is a particle and at the same time the totality of the cosmos. Um, this idea, just, I mean, it's like there's we are what we are, right? It's like we are these, like small s, selves that are these, like ego identities moving through the world as separate distinct individuals. And also, at least from this
Yeah.
perspective, what we are is so much more, and what we have access to, including unseen help, in my
Right.
particular view, is so
Yeah.
immense and so vast. So
Yeah.
that helps.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think as an Aquarian myself with a ton of Aquarius placements, most of my spiritual work is very much in that kind of energetic, like visualization field. I've tried to do a lot of like, um, actually like creating, and I have a lot of altars around my house, but I end up coming back constantly instead of with objects or with bowls of water and candles to literally just visualization of energy. And so I finally realized, like, I think that's because I have so many aquarium placements. But for me, a lot of my, because I work with energy day in and day out, very specifically as an acupuncturist, my interest has developed into how to work with the energy field. And I've kind of come to this feeling of like, energy field hygiene is like the fundamental first level of self care. Like sleep is great, but it's not going to be good quality sleep if you're not managing your energy field well. Same with your food. Like all of the stuff we do that's in the mundane world is super important. But if it does not have, if the kind of groundwater behind it or the backdrop behind it of your energy field is not well maintained, you're always just running to catch up, you know? And so for me, what I've been teaching students, what I've been doing in the treatment room, what I've been doing for myself is super simple, like emphasis on simple, because we tend to make things super complicated and therefore like it's really easy then. I think often it's a resistance tool and like a negative resistance tool, meaning that we don't really want to do this work. So if we make it complicated, we won't want to do it, even more. So I try and make it so simple. And oftentimes I'm just releasing people's energy back to themselves and calling my energy back to me. And I will literally do it in between clients as I clean the sheets. And I just say, I release you back to you and I call me back to me. That is the simplest form of it. But it's recognizing we talk a lot about people being in our space. And what we don't recognize is if they're in our space, we're in theirs. There's always an energy exchange. And so we clear folks out with love. We're not like, again, we're not resisting them being in our space because ultimately we invited them in on some subconscious level, but we release them back to them. I would take my kids home from school in the like elementary school years and be like, all right, let's release all of your friends back to them, blow them kisses, wave goodbye, tell them thanks so much for playing today, but I'll see you tomorrow. Now I'm going home into my time, and then call all of the parts of you that have gone wandering back to yourself. And I'll use these kind of childlike metaphors with clients because it's more fun and it's more like it graspable. It makes sense. So you blow kisses to all the people who've been in your space, even if you don't like them very much, and you let them go. And then you call your energy back to you until you feel some kind of shift with this exchange. For me, it's often like the light shifts a little bit. As my eyes are closed, I can feel the light shift just in my body, or there's a change, like a deep breath, or my body relaxes in some way, or I just have gotten to know over the years what feels like me and what feels like me when I'm carrying a backpack worth of other people's energetic baggage, you know? And as you start to get this very subtle, which becomes not very subtle over the years, distinction between the two, that kind of daily energetic clearing, setting a grounding cord, releasing the old grounding cord, setting a new grounding cord from the base of your spine to the center of the earth. Super simple techniques what's not simple about it is it acknowledges that fundamentally energy fields are a real thing and that
Mhm.
we are engaging energetically with the world first. And that's where people struggle. And that's where for me, I forget that people struggle with that because it's such a like, of course, in my experience, but I feel like that's kind of always been my awareness somehow. So educating people as to the fact that, energy is real. Just because we've monetized it into energy bars and energy drinks doesn't mean like that the other version of energy, which is, the kind of emanation of your natural chi out to, in this kind
Mhm.
of um dome around you, does not affect you. Like the idea that that is not affecting your day-to-day reality is ludicrous. So, but getting people into an awareness of that is actually quite fun. And then I will take them into clearing techniques once they kind of feel their energy field, um, through various visualizations that I'll take folks through, and they can kind of be like, oh, I see what you're talking about. It's nothing woo woo. It's just like why I feel so bad when I walk into, Costco on a Saturday afternoon and I'm inundated by everybody's vibes and I have to get the hell out of there. I'm like, it's your energy field getting overwhelmed, it's nothing crazy, it's nothing weird, it's just what is. And so for me, the majority of my baseline daily regulation practices are clearings, clearing from my clients and letting their energy go fully and completely so that I'm present to whoever comes next. Clearing of my kids too, and so that I'm not too in their space and too enmeshed with them. Clearing of media that I have been engaged with, especially social media, because it is so sticky and it gets in your field and it can be very super fun and you got to clear from it. So lots and lots of clearing and grounding. For me, that's the baseline orientation of my energetic self care that comes before everything else. So for me, that's my meditation practice. I'll use a lot of like Hertz music to get myself into a slightly altered state where I can start to visualize this with a little more depth. Um, and so I try and keep it super simple, otherwise, I won't do it. If there's a lot of
Mhm.
props, if there's a lot of like complexity to it, I totally won't do it. I have such resistance to that, And but my own visualization and, like I said, using some music that will, or hertz sounds and vibrations that will help me access more of a trance state more easily. Um, Otherwise, I'm just sitting with my brain, which sometimes doesn't go in the nicest of places. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to give myself, a little support and turn on that vibration music and frequency music and help myself shift. So,
Mm, mm, yeah, I love that. All of that is just so on point. And I think, it's just interesting, this piece about like internal resistance of not wanting to do this work and like who is like which part of self or like who is the one that doesn't want to do it because I feel like that's like the ego, it's like the ego doesn't want to let go, right? To that like clinging, to like all of the stuff. But it's like part of the medicine is, kind of like getting out of that state, right? And like also just like um the maybe just like out of the box nature of even sort of, talking about energy work or sort of the energetic field. And I think going back to what you said at the beginning, like about, the Cartesian divide between mind and body and just like the materialist reductionist, frame of the world that, like this is like a paradigm shift. And I think, hey, maybe this is part of the Uranus and Pluto and air signs that were, that there's just more like maybe acceptance of or recognition of. And I mean, there's certainly scientific evidence and validation of,
right,
energetic fields. Like, I mean, the toroidal field, even just of like the electromagnetics of the heart, right? Going back to the fire element and the heart, like this is the measurement of the electromagnetic field that the electrical impulse of the SA node in the heart creates, to generate the contraction of the heart muscle, right? So that you have a heartbeat, like actually extends out like 6 feet from the body, at least.
Right.
So, I mean, it's
Right.
like this is actually not that woo woo. I mean, it's basically science kind of catching up to understanding and sort of explaining some of the things that all of these, kind of traditional cultural systems have known for a very long time. And yeah, and I may there be more of that acceptance, because I think I've certainly seen, as I know you have as well, what a difference it makes in people's capacity to get back to a place of regulation and kind of centeredness, so as to be able to respond rather than react, to not
Yeah.
have to get hijacked and then become a tool of the state, or like perpetuate harm, or be in choose inactivity, out of like kind of paralysis, and to kind of get back to compassion as a something that allows us to have I mean, it's like the distinction between compassion and empathy, like reading the news, even. It's like compassion is just like spaciousness, where I mean, like the different neuroscience looking at the difference between empathy and compassion shows that, like, if I'm not feeling with you, like, kind of in an empathic way, where it's like I read these atrocities in the news and then I'm just like going down the tubes, but it's like I'm now in a dorsal vagal shutdown and I just can't, I'm like, it's helplessness. I have no options, but like, compassion, is a way of, kind of like holding this a little bit more lightly with less ego identification, a little bit more spaciousness. And it actually, kind of is shown to activate regions of the brain that trigger a move toward, kind of acting to reduce suffering, and so to me it's like, well, this is, I think, if we were able to come from that place, to, like you said, kind of like be aimed toward the world that we want to create, and in the interim, be responding to the conditions that we're in, rather than paralysis or reactivity, that may get us there a little bit more effectively.
That was one of my favorite parts of acupuncture school training is we very much discussed the difference between what they discussed it as enmeshment with our clients and interface. And that if we were to be in a position of enmeshment with our clients, we will be absolutely ineffective as acupuncturists. First off, we're in our client's energetic field inappropriately. So it's a boundary crossing. And second, you can't think about an appropriate, like literally, if I'm sitting there with a client jumping into their field and going down the rabbit hole of their story, of their trauma, or of whatever's going on, I don't have enough brain power to come up with an acupuncture treatment. And I've got like 5 minutes to figure this shit out. Like I'm listening to these clients and I'm listening to these stories, and simultaneously I'm trying to figure out what is in their best interest right now. For me as an acupuncturist, where am I going to put the needles so that they can have less suffering in their life? So
Mm-hmm.
the beautiful part about this work for me has been constant day in, day out training, so that when confronted with suffering, I have full capacity for my compassion without it hijacking my capacity to be like, how can I help? What can I do right here? What can I literally do to reduce this suffering? And it helps to have it as a job because people are paying me. So there is literally like I mean, I need to show up for them to be worthy of the what they're paying me. So I can't jump into their story. Otherwise, I'm not going to be effective at my job. And so it has really trained me in that way. And I think that is an incredibly valuable. I'm very grateful for my training that made it so explicit right from the get-go. Like right from, I mean, I think that conversation happened in one of the first weeks of school. And it kind of kept happening throughout it and made it really clear you will be of no value to your clients if you're all up in their energy field. And the same is true with when we interact with the chaos that is going on right now. I can interact with it, I'm taking it in. I am having deep compassion for the people who are experiencing these things. And then I recognize if I jump down the rabbit hole and go down it, I will not be of any value. So I'm going to figure out, is this a situation like, can I donate? Is there some way I can be of value in this situation? Or is this situation not necessarily where I'm putting my energy right now because I'm putting it all over here? But if I'm jumping into the rabbit hole, I've used up all my chi and all my creativity for problem solving on being enmeshed. And
Mhm.
I think so much of our culture has struggled with, because we've created, objectivity as the ultimate thing. Well, objectivity has tended in practice, whether or not this was how it was meant, to lack compassion. So we have this kind of, either we're enmeshed and we care, or we're unenmeshed and we're objective when we don't care. We have this kind of binary going on in our heads. I'm like, that's not actually it. Like, we're not either all over here or we're super distant. We can be right here. We can be super present with somebody and not going down the rabbit hole with them. Because also, I can't, then I'm just kind of in a sympathy place of like, oh, that's so hard for you. That's so awful. And that actually doesn't give them the kind of agency and support they truly need.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it has been a practice of mine, for the entirety of my career. Like, how do I strike this balance of being super present and effective in my work at transforming the pain that you're dealing with right now without
Mhm.
ignoring the ramifications of that pain on your
Mhm.
spirit, you know?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I love that ask. I love that part of clinical work. I love
Mhm.
that challenge on a daily basis. I find that very gratifying and it keeps me growing as a person.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like good training for what we're, facing and just a good practice for life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know we could probably go on and on, but maybe unless we can, conclude with any final thoughts and close up for today. And I hope to
Yeah.
come back and
I
talk
hope so.
more because there's many more different, avenues to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I feel really complete in what we've discussed. So,
Yeah, I do too. I feel like this is maybe a good stopping point for today. And yeah, really grateful to you as
awesome.
always for your work in the world and your presence and friendship in my life. So
Oh, and
yeah,
same back at you. I'm just so grateful to you. I mean, it's been so many decades and it's just lovely. It's just
indeed.
wonderful.
Yeah,
So,
thank you. Yeah, and thanks to, folks who listened in and hope to see you again. And until then, be well and take good care.